Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is the Aspen City Council work session for July 17th, 2023. We have a couple items on our agenda this evening. Council goal work plan, update of customer-focused government, financial update in 2024 base budget assumptions, and then we have some time for council board reports and updates. We'll go ahead and get right into it.
Mr. Mayor, may I share my screen?
Please do.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I'm Tyler Kristoff, Deputy Director of Public Works. I'm also joined by a few of my colleagues here. I have Kim Ferber, our Police Chief, Philip Sapino, our Community Development Director, and Alyssa Farrell, our Administrative Services Director. We're here tonight to talk about City Council's work plan, and tonight's focus will be on your customers-focused government goals. So similar to last week's work session, we have a couple things that we're requesting of council tonight. Really, we're here to make sure that staff's milestones match up to council's intentions for your customer-focused government goal. And we're here tonight to collect any other feedback of the plan, of the work plan, or any other requests of staff. So just quickly to review the goal language that you adopted at your June 20th council meeting via resolution. We have the language up on the screen. We believe customer-focused governance is an important part of who we are and how we effectively serve the Aspen community. We're passionate about our interactions, our perceptions, the customer experience, and we're really excited to continue this important work through this work plan. So you'll note this goal might look slightly different from the other goals that you will see throughout the next few weeks of work sessions. Many of the efforts in the customer-focused government goal are multi-year efforts and efforts that will ultimately continue to be a part of the organization long after the project is completed. So really what we're trying to show you here is give you a general idea of project duration for each of these milestones with a theoretical council check-in from a work session standpoint. You'll also see in lighter blue that these efforts continue on, as I said, past the project duration, and really that indicates our continued commitment to this type of work within the organization. So getting right into the milestones, one of our first milestones is customer service standards assessment. So service has been identified in practice as a key value within our organization. However, we've also heard from folks that means slightly different things to different folks in different work groups within our organization. We really think that consistency and intentionality around customer services is key to creating great interactions with our customers throughout our business functions in the city. So we're convening an internal group to work through these discussions, but we also recognize there's some amazing local entities out there that work in the hospitality space. And we've already begun to make those connections and leverage that collective knowledge base in the community that will serve as some inspiration for our project. So we anticipate this to be at least two phases, with the first phase identifying who our customers are, what customer service practices are across functions, and really we'd like to develop a common set of standards across the organization. Moving into phase two in later years, this would really look like training and development and onboarding of staff as we create some of these standards across the organization. Moving on to our next milestone, I'll turn it over to Kim.
Thank you, Tyler. Good afternoon, City Council. Kim Ferber, your Chief of Police. In support of goal number 4, customer-focused government, subsection A, the Police Department will be conducting a gap analysis on 3 key priorities. 2 of the gap analysis have already begun earlier this year. They are on customer outreach efforts and services being provided to victims. The third, which has been recently recommended by staff, is a gap analysis on our processes related to residential and business alarm customers. In terms of community outreach, we participate in about one outreach program per month. In fact, tomorrow morning, we invite all of you to our community event in front of the police department between 8 o'clock a.m. and 10 o'clock a.m. Don't miss it. In terms of victim services, we are going to be looking at our antiquated RMS tracking system to see how we're meeting the needs of our victims. We're going to be looking at staff training, and we'll also be conducting victim feedback surveys related to victims' rights, access to services, as well as whether or not detectives are meeting or exceeding victim expectations as expected by the Aspen community. And finally, residential and business alarms. Several years ago, our team undertook a pretty arduous task in looking at our internal processes and creating some efficiencies in those processes. However, we are prepared now to look at the gap analysis outward facing for our community, and that's by putting together a steering committee with key stakeholders to implement online payments, and also looking at law enforcement best practices with surveys to those similar serving communities. In terms of our timeline, staff will complete an analysis of our current practices, develop surveys, stand up steering committees, and collect resources by the end of Q4 of this year. Beginning in Q1 of next year, we will hold bi-weekly meetings to develop key recommendations for consideration, and I anticipate by early Q2 2024 coming back to you with key recommendations for your consideration. In terms of resources, it's hard for me to identify those at this time. However, I do feel that by Q2 2024, when we have a work session, I'll be able to identify the resources that we would be seeking from all of you with your approval. And finally, we may be asking to implement a software platform that randomly seeks anonymous feedback regarding contacts with law enforcement as well as with our victims.
Awesome, thanks, Kim. I don't think I've ever gotten to present with the chief of police before in front of council. I feel like it adds some gravitas.
I'm as nervous next to you as you are next to me.
I actually feel really safe. This is great. So anyway, I'm here to speak about 3 of the sub-goals for the customer-focused government goal, starting with sub-goal B, which is continuing to optimize development review processes. This project has been, in one iteration or another, a city manager's office priority for several years. And in response to that prioritization, earlier this year, staff stood up what we're calling a permitting advisory group. It's composed of representatives at different levels in the organization from all of our development review agencies. So that's utilities, parks, engineering, and building and planning. And that group has been charged with ensuring that our processes are efficient, that our service to our customers and to the community is responsive, and that it's delivering on the development outcomes that the community desires from private and public sector development in the community. This is ongoing work. Again, we stood up the group starting in March of this year, and staff is honestly excited about some of the innovations that we feel like are coming out of this work and will continue to come out of this work, as well as significant progress that we've made to date on making improvements in the short term to how we deliver those services and how those turn into development outcomes for the community. Again, this is ongoing work. Staff does not expect this to wrap up, certainly during the current sort of 2-year goal period. And as was noted in the memo, there's a strong tie-in with this particular sub-goal and both C and E sub-goals in this same customer-focused government goal. And so it's our anticipation that some of the work of the permit advisory group is going to be included in future discussions with council about work on all 3 of those sub-goals. And to the extent that there are resources needed, again, those resource asks will come at a specific time and place and will likely be in context of those other 2 sub-goals as well. And moving right into C, again, part of this sort of 3 sub-goal tie-in. This one focused, again, on the land use code. There was a historical practice in community development for a long time to identify and inventory areas in the land use code that could use some amendment. This could be anything from a wrong reference from one section of the code to another, that's just a technical fix, all the way into something maybe a little more substantive, like responding to changes in HVAC technology and where that type of equipment can be located on a lot, right? But usually small, technical in nature. We haven't done a raft of sort of miscellaneous amendments like that in some time. And the discussion that was held during the council retreat really focused on this idea that regulations translate into process, and process translates into time. And that's staff time and it's applicant time. And so staff's conception of how to respond to sub-goal B is, again, to take council's direction from the retreat and move in small steps with the land use code, as opposed to sort of taking a larger, more holistic look at the whole code. But to present to council opportunities to find efficiency in the land use code and other sections potentially of the municipal code that tie into the land use code, present those to council for amendment in the context of, again, trying to find that efficiency, both for our staff and the time spent by staff, as well as the time experienced in our process by customers. And broadly speaking, the broader the scope of those amendments, the more staff time and potential financial resources would be needed to support that effort. Because again, the land use code requires that we amend the land use code in a very specific way, which includes public outreach and engagement with our boards and commissions. So again, scope will sort of translate into resource needs there. And particularly focusing on boards and commissions, which is something that was discussed with staff in the past council. Any amendments to the authority or jurisdictions or role of boards and commissions in our land use review processes would constitute a fairly extensive look at the code, and could therefore translate into more time and more money. And staff looks forward to scoping some of those amendments starting later this year with council.
There we go. Alyssa Farrell, Administrative Services Director, and as Philip stated, I'm also really excited to be able to work with a group that a diverse, pun intended, group that I don't typically get to work with. So this milestone is on accessibility and multilingual efforts. We've expanded it to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, also called DEIA. And there's a definition, really it's to simplify the definition, it's making sure everyone feels included and a sense of belonging within the DEIA lens. So staff, they're really excited to work on this goal. It is serendipitous because, we are actively pursuing a lot of initiatives under this milestone already. And we already have a DEIA steering committee set up. Next slide. Some of our projects include, in addition to accessibility and multilingual efforts, we do have, as I mentioned, a DEI steering committee, and we have training, citywide training on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, early August for all of our staff. We also have expansion of multilingual services underway for our community and internally. And then we're also looking at a DEIA citywide gap analysis. So we have this umbrella that we're calling DEIA, and components under that are accessibility and multilingual efforts. So we don't know what our blind spots are unless we do this an analysis for our community and internally. And that is underway, looking at a consultant and services to determine what are our blind spots truly, in addition to expanding our multilingual services and coming into compliance with the Colorado accessibility law that goes into effect midsummer of next year. So this gap analysis will include an action plan which then we can make continual progress on. The timeline specifically, you have an asterisk around areas that likely will include a funding request that's currently under review and discussion.
Great, and so the third leg of the development process stool here in customer-focused government is asking us to look at developing policies and/or regulations to ensure the review of land use and permitting applications is administered in a reasonable, fair, and appropriate period of time. And staff's read of this particular sub-goal really does harken back to several decades worth of conversation in the community about the relationship between development and the role that the city plays in facilitating and supporting that development in our community and all the benefits that it provides. And the relationship between that and the social, economic, and environmental fabric of the community. There are several iterations of this conversation going back a few decades, and staff looks forward to supporting that conversation with this particular council in response to this sub-goal. Generally speaking, development and community character are two sides of the same conversational coin, if you will, to sort of mix metaphors. And so it'll be important for us to do things like defining terms and terms used in the sub-goal language, as well as some of the assumptions that the community makes in guiding documents like the Aspen Area Community Plan in terms of helping to establish the scope and the desired outcomes from this particular sub-goal. Staff, again, will begin towards the end of this year in working with council to provide some of that history and background of that conversation in the community over time, identifying shared definitions, and again, working towards identifying potential policy improvements to make sure that we are aligning process with those competing interests and arriving at the outcomes that council desires. And again, as I've said previously, scope will translate into cost. At this point, staff has done some preliminary work with potential consultants who can help us produce reports that will inform council thinking about how the development review process works in some comparable communities. We think that report will cost somewhere between about $20,000 and $50,000. And so staff will likely need those resources in order to move forward with that report. Again, starting in the fourth quarter of this year, we look forward to coming back to council to start that conversation.
So council staff feels that these are some creative, exciting projects that we are looking forward to tackling, but obviously we wanted to check in with you to make sure that these were really matching the intent of the customer-focused goal and really are work worth doing for staff moving forward. So I'll turn it over to you for any questions you may have of staff.
Thank you so
Mr. Mayor,
much.
real quick, a housekeeping item. Can you please stop sharing screen? Thank you.
I'll start with council members. Do you have any comments? There's two questions that are posed in front of you, and any input, feedback? Ward, I'll start with you if I could.
Yeah, most of the time I read the memos and I jot down questions and I continue reading those. Those questions have been answered within the memo. So, Philip, you answered one tonight about HVAC systems, code changes, heights of these energy efficiency things, and I'm happy to see that included in this. I had a couple of questions. One, I'll start with Philip. For the task force that you've assembled, do you have any private sector members of that?
We don't, and I want to be clear, we have not assembled a sort of task force in the community-facing sense. This is an internal working group of staff members who are looking at our processes and working internally to initiate that change. Prior to the pandemic, community development staff was working with a couple of dozen members of the development community to guide similar work at that time. And we have conceived of a community-facing, development community-facing component to this goal, but that sort of level of detail in terms of the staff response to the goal is something that we look forward to having a more detailed conversation with council about in the future.
So, as I understand this, the phase one is going to be to identify and within the departments to come up with plans, and then phase two would be to present to us and maybe look for action items.
Right. So again, right now the work that we're conducting, internal facing work, is resulting in process changes. Right. We've been making we're sort of constantly making changes to our processes, and we are doing that in a more focused way for the last several months. Council's interaction with staff on this, I think, is going to be focused primarily on, one, helping to establish, as I suggested, sort of what are the development outcomes that council would like to see in the community with respect to that relationship between regulations, process, and time, and how that translates into the built environment. And so it's that sort of higher level policy guidance that staff will be seeking from council. But in terms of how that translates into phasing for the process, that isn't really how we've conceived of the timeline at this point. We're sort of we're kind of walking and chewing gum at the same time here.
You're inward focused on this initial phases.
Only because we have been for several months. We're just getting into the council goals response process now. And as I suggested, later on this year, we look forward to coming to council and facilitating a conversation at that high level about council's policy and development sort of.
Yeah, and just for
goals.
the record and for the public, that this process has been going on for really at least a year, looking at increasing efficiency of the permitting process. So I appreciate that, and again, I think I mentioned Tuesday night that many of these processes take more than 2 years, so we need continuity through the change in councils that we continue to make progress on these goals. Then I had a question for Kim. The alarm response, has that become, isn't it a revenue generator for the police department responding to fire alarms? And is that, maybe not to answer this question now, but to just leave it as a question, is that impacting the services the police department is delivering?
These are in response to the burglar alarms, and there is a fee associated with those. One of the things that we're looking at is how we are serving the customers, in a sense that right now we are still receiving payment through checks. And so we want to create an easier way for our customers to be able to make payment to us, and then we will be assessing how it's impacting our services as well.
And to make sure that it is a enterprise fund, that it's not costing the police department. If anything, that it's increasing revenues, I would hope.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Finally, Alyssa, I wouldn't be complete if I didn't ask a question of you.
I'm ready for it.
So these are state, at least state or federally mandated projects. And the question is, are there state resources available to us to do this evaluation and comparison and steps forward?
Thank you. For the accessibility, the state accessibility milestone and requirement, there are resources. Our communications team, along with IT, they formed a committee, a task force really internally that meets, and our communications coordinator is actively working with the state on gathering resources and information on how to move our accessibility component forward. And we're talking about making sure all of our website, our internal documents, our PDFs, the intranet, everything is meeting the accessibility legislation. So it is a fairly heavy lift, and we feel that we do have the resources available. We may be coming back asking for additional consulting services and resources to make sure we're moving in this direction. However, our team currently, with cross-departmental employees participating, are able to look and focus on the website and move the needle there in preparation for next summer.
Yeah, I would think that this is a common practice or endeavor across the state with different municipalities.
Yes, it is for all of us, and that is definitely a networking group of resources and shared information.
Good.
If I may address that question, Mr. Mayor, I'm also working with Alyssa's team and the team she's developed to address this. To your question directly, Ward, the state is working on this as well. They will have to comply statewide. I don't think at this point they've released any information about state resources that may be available to municipalities that may be able to assist with this. But it could be a possibility in the future. We just, at this point in time, that hasn't been made available. No information on that particular topic has been made available to us.
Yeah,
Thank you, Kate.
unfunded mandates.
Yes, yes, but it's more about networking and coming together and sharing ideas and having conversations too. And I just wanted to recognize Kate. She's also a member of our DEIA steering committee where we're coming together, developing a work plan, which is in line with the multilingual and accessibility components of the milestones here.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if the state tells us to do something, that they can help us in achieving that. Thank you.
There's always hope. I'm going to go to Bill.
Thank you very much. I hope you're all well. Thanks to staff for the presentation. Can everyone hear me okay?
We got you.
Great, thanks. So firstly, I wanted to elaborate on where I personally was coming from in suggesting this goal and working towards this as being one of our council goals. And something that I feel is a little bit missing from the language in the sub goals is that there's a cultural component to customer service that I think could be improved in a major way throughout the city government. And it's not tangible process stuff. It's not tangible product stuff, though those are important. But there's an attitude and a culture that could be significantly improved upon that I want to make sure is not neglected. And what I mean by that, to be explicit, is that the city government has not always, as a whole, I'm not trying to pick on anyone individually, and I won't do that, but it doesn't feel like the civil servitude is there. It does not feel like the desire is to help the community members. It does not feel like we are going to do what we can to help you in the way that you need. And I think that's where we can improve a lot. And I think that will go a long way in our community. So I want to make sure that that notion is not left on the table and not forgotten. DEIA. I'm not crazy about this sub goal. I think that if there's a state compliance component to this, then just do it to comply with the state stuff. But I'm not sure. I personally haven't heard the community asking for multilingual pay policies. I don't know if that's a component of the state thing or not. I just don't really see the ROI on the resources on this particular one. Similar to it's interesting to me that Kim is sitting there at the table today. I think that the things that she's talking about are appreciated, although I think that the city police department gets community-based policing. They get the notion of that really, really well. And the service provided by the city police department, in my experience, is fantastic. So I guess I'm privileged not to know what it's like to be on the victim side of things. And if there's an issue there, of course, let's work on that. But to me, the city police department is not the one that needs the most customer-focused government work. And lastly, I wanted to speak a little bit about the development process goals. Ultimately, I think it's critical that we do come up with mandated response timelines on submittals. I think that, as I mentioned before, the work that has been done and will continue to be done as a result of this effort is going to be very fruitful. But I think the only way to make sure that it lasts and doesn't sort of slip over time in the future when all of us are not at these tables is by making sure that we have statutory response timelines for various types of permits and land use submissions. I do not believe that growth management should be handled at an administrative level through land use and permitting processes. And I think that is what has happened a lot in the past, and I want to eliminate that as an option. I'm not saying I'm opposed to growth management entirely, but I don't think that the permitting and land use processes are the appropriate place for it. That's all I had. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill. We'll come back to some of those comments in a minute. John?
Yeah, I agree with Ward. This memo was pretty self-explanatory and thorough. My only question is, because I think this relates to the permitting process, but how are our staffing levels at ComDev? I know that affects permit times.
It does, and we are presently 1 FTE in building and 1 FTE in planning away from full staffing for the first time in 3.5 years, which is exciting for us.
It's excellent news. I look forward to 100%. And just while I'm at it, I'm curious, how's our police department staffing?
We are, we're actually very close. We have 2 people that are in background right now that are set to go to the academy. If they complete their background successfully in August, that would bring us to full staffing. And we have a lateral applicant with 15 years of experience who's a local. And if they successfully complete their background, we will go to 1 overhire. We also have 3 people, including 1 internal candidate right now who has applied for our records management, team, and if we obtain that, we'll be fully staffed.
Terrific. That's great news. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Sam?
Thank you, Tori. I appreciate the memo and everything you guys are doing. I do think this is heading in the right direction. It's a customer service focused government. I guess the one thing I would say, no questions, just comment, is permitting and parking are the 2 things that I hear the most as far as customer service goes, and they all come from like the business community, generally speaking. And on the parking side of things, the complaints I hear through the grapevine is businesses that have parking permits downtown have a hard time renewing them and a hard time getting a hold of the parking department. So that's one example of a customer service-based facet of this government that I hope can be improved as an additional intent of what the memo currently does. So thank you all.
Thanks, Sam. My comments are brief, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about the items that Bill brought up. The first thing I wanted to say was I really appreciate in the DEIA efforts. Let me see if I can pull this up real quickly. You had, in one of your slides that you just showed, you had a picture that contained a colorful Aspen logo with this: the city of Aspen is committed to fostering a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible environment that values and embraces all races, ethnicities, cultures, gender or gender identities, religions, sexual orientations, nationalities, socioeconomic statuses, languages, disabilities, ages, or any human qualities that differ from another group. That poster that you brought back up is wonderful. Those words are wonderful. I think I said in one of our last meetings that it's a surprise and kind of a shame that we have to focus on this, and it's front and center for us all still in 2023. But I just want to say that these words and that picture that depicts it are fantastic for us to state publicly and to stand behind continually. So I want to say thank you for that. I think it's very important that we as a municipality make it very clear that this is where we come from with our policies. I want to go back into some, my overall comment here is that this is great. I appreciate the focus of this effort. I think that the city does a really good job with our customer service. I think that we very much work on behalf of our community, and I think we show up that way often. Are there times where we hear of negative interactions? Absolutely. The city is in the business of collecting monies from people, enforcing rules and regulations, and putting some guidelines on our development. And so it doesn't agree with everybody. That I understand. Again, I want to reference something that's written in here at the very top. Customer-focused government. Maintaining and enhancing relationships with residents, businesses, and visitors is critical to provide services essential to our community. City of Aspen will continuously improve customer services and processes with our customers in mind. Again, it is so important that we state these things clearly and that we stand behind them and that we work towards them. One of Bill's comments was about cultural improvements. As I read down a little bit further, it talks about maintaining and enhancing relationships critical to local government. Equally important are internal services and norms associated with serving and interacting with our peers. The combination and intersection of these concepts is central to our organizational culture. So it is referenced very directly about our culture. I think that, as a council member, for Bill to be putting this on the table and putting it in front of us again is very justifiable. But I think that we do a great job, and I think that this effort is along the lines of what Bill is talking about. These are not just process improvements. These are process improvements that then do impact the culture, not just internally, but how we deal with our community as well. So I was going to give Sarah an opportunity to respond a little bit. Bill had just a couple of items there that he wanted, and one was this cultural improvement idea. I see it reflected in the language that's here. So I don't know if you have any comments towards that, but.
Sure, I believe the goal language in the work plan is sufficiently covering the topic.
Okay. Bill, another suggestion from Bill is timelines, actual timelines for permitting. I think that through this work, perhaps we're going to get to something that can be similar to a timeline. I'm looking at Philip directly right now. I don't know how that works in a department. I don't know what setting a 6-month or 1 year, this, that, and the other kind of timeline means for the workload and the process improvements that you're about to look at. So I would say to Bill's request there that can be considered in the work that's going forward, but I don't think we would put in timelines prior to the work that we're about to embark on. So I appreciate it again, and I think we've all talked about this at this table, that we would like to get somewhere where there is an understanding or expectations around permitting timelines, but I don't know, well, I do know that right now is not the time for us to set those, but through the work that you're about to do, perhaps you'll come back to us with more information regarding that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tori. I was trying to state what I would hope the end game will be. I understand that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get to that point, but I don't want all of that great work to go to waste. And I think the only way long-term to make sure that it does not go to waste is to have something where it's like, if you are applying for a XYZ permit, you can expect a response. You will get a response within X number of days, weeks, months, whatever the number ends up being.
I appreciate that. I'm looking at Philip again. Is that part of kind of what you're looking at in the scope? And
so what I was trying to suggest, and maybe I wasn't being clear enough in my language, it's staff's view that is one of many topics that council can direct staff on, right? And that staff's job is to facilitate that discussion at the council table amongst the 5 elected officials. There are communities that have mandatory response times to different types of permits. There are communities that don't. There are communities that have shorter and longer response times for different types of permits. There are communities that have more or fewer regulations than we do. I don't believe that staff has informed this council with enough information that you would need to understand how our systems presently work and where the opportunities might be for policy direction from council to make those processes work better. And so it's important, I think, for staff to give council that opportunity, to be fully informed about how things work presently, give you some basis for comparison in other communities, and then support a policy discussion amongst the 5 members of council.
great, thank you for that. That is that is around the major topics that I saw here. Again, I think that this is work that we're doing. I think it's great that it's in front of us and that this is of primary importance to us. I think it has been. When Sarah started in her current role with us, that was one of the first things that you denoted was like, hey, cultural change is necessary here, needed here, and it takes time. So we are still in the beginning stages of that, but I believe that we're on the right track, and I appreciate this being in our goals. I can't help but sit here and kind of think, it's great that we're talking about this. That means that we're doing a lot of other stuff really well and really right. Because now this is really sharpening the pencil again, and so I just think that this gives me great comfort that we are talking about this and not some other stuff. Ward.
Yeah, just a couple of follow-ups. One of which, Bill made a mention that it's not the function of, growth control should not be an administrative function. And I agree with that. I think that the complexity of our code and the number of changes in ideas or plans add to how long it takes a plan to make it from beginning to end. And I think that you suggested in the memo, and I agree, that if we have policy changes that, number one, want to put some kind of controls on growth, that would affect the permit times, because it would probably decrease the number of permits that were being processed. That's something that the council can discuss if we want to have changes in growth management, but I agree that it's not the administrative function. But I know that ComDev has been short-staffed. They've been hit with a lot of changes, and so that the length of time a process takes is a function of all those things. And if they're in your work plan, you say that if we have policy changes that can affect this, some are small, some are large. And it's in the process of the next year and a half or whatever, that we decide that we need to have some policy changes on the land use code or whatever, that could very well affect the timeline on the permit processing. And then I did have a comment to Sam about the parking permits for businesses are hard to get renewed. Something that's come to our attention in the past is that a lot of the downtown business owners complain about not having parking available in front of their spaces, while at the same time their employees are parked in front of their spaces. So if we want to make parking available in the downtown core, it's not necessarily required that a business owner or manager is able to park all day in front of their space. So that's something that has aspects to it that deserve our attention. But if we were to answer customer service by parking availability, we have to look at that as well. And we've started to look at it, and I think it's a topic that needs some diving into.
Thanks, Ward.
Mayor Tory, if I can just make a clarifying comment, because it came up twice, I want to just state really clearly that I did not suggest that the permitting and development review process is a growth control measure, and that's not how the development review process works. What I was trying to describe when I was speaking about the policy development subgoal E is merely that the relationship between the extensive regulations that the city has for development translates into process, which translates into time. But just to be really clear, the permit process is not a administrative growth control measure. And
Yeah,
that's
you
really- I
didn't
wanna be
bring
very
that
clear
up.
about that.
Bill brought that up, and I was responding to it. You did not bring that up.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I
Yep,
appreciate
and
that. I think that's
Philip, I was not accusing you of bringing that up. Totally, that's coming from my experience and belief that the community historically has used those processes and piled those processes on one another as a form of growth management. Not something targeted directly towards you at all. please don't interpret it that way.
Great, okay. I'm glad we're all on the same page. That's
Yeah,
excellent.
and I think we are. Sarah and I had a conversation about this a while ago. I think that there have been people in the past that have looked at it like that or enjoyed that kind of side benefit, perhaps, from their view. You know, I've been on and off as a council member here for 20 years, and that was never a conversation that I had at the table. That was never a conversation that I even had away from the table. So for me, I do not look at our process as growth control or trying to slow down development. That is not the appropriate place for any of that. So I think we are on the same page with that. And I don't think everybody has been in the past, but I think we are today. Any other questions or information that you would like from us?
Don't think so.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Sorry, Mayor Tory, may I add one comment around DEIA?
Yeah.
Just, it's really about making sure every voice, every marginalized voice is heard.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, council.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this to us. Appreciate it. Now we can talk about how to fund some of these things that we ask for. If you insist.
Mr. Mayor, council members, Pete Strecker, Finance Director. Feel like I'm out of practice. I haven't been here in a while.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you. May I share my screen?
You might want to stretch and warm up.
I don't feel that actually.
Go right ahead. So I thought I was on the court for a second. Oops.
Bullpen.
Take some warm-up tosses.
Look at that. It's like riding a bike, huh?
That's a pretty fan. Where's that?
Is it Snyder Park? Where is that?
This is Snyder Park, yes. This is the flume, I think they call it at Snyder Park. Thanks for having me tonight.
Are you on red?
I am now on green, supposedly. Colorblind guy that I am. Up is on, that's all I know.
How are you sure?
So I'm here tonight to present with you some of the latest financial figures that we've had actually sent in your inbox this afternoon, the latest figures through May for our sales and lodging tax. So we'll kind of hit on those and then briefly talk about planning for next year and kind of giving you some insight as to what we're thinking along the way. So I tried to highlight everything in yellow that I changed from the presentation packet that was published. Again, these numbers are brand new, so I figured I'd try to work them in for everybody's benefit. Overall, I'd like to say that, we are experiencing some headwinds at this point. Obviously, the Fed action on interest rates has had its desired effect, basically trying to slow down some of the economic growth that the country's been having. That is great in the aspect of trying to curb inflation because it starts to push down consumption. But that then means that really creates a bad thing for the rest of us and as an industry or as an individual, basically. So, coupling that with some of the impacts from the war in Ukraine and then basically the labor shortages we've been experiencing, we really do have some challenges in front of us as a community, really, on economic growth and kind of keeping that engine going. Also with that, you have the strength of the U.S. dollar really kind of pushing away a lot of the international tourists coming back. So you actually probably saw a recent newspaper article in the local paper about some of the challenges for Australians and New Zealanders maybe traveling to our community. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But they certainly are seeing the price here and maybe taking a second look at our community versus another option. So in terms of sales tax, we are pacing just a little bit above 4% over 2021 through 5 months now. We are seeing that different segments of our economy are feeling the effects in one way or another. So we had a long stretch of goods purchasing, if you will, a lot of e-bikes, a lot of stand-up paddle boards, golf clubs, things of that nature. Over the last number of years when COVID hit, and people have kind of filled their quivers and got their new skis, and some of that spending is starting to go away. In terms of the other side of the economy, you really still have services that are desired. So people that didn't get to travel for so long are still traveling. A lot of actually U.S. travelers are traveling abroad as opposed to even within the states. But that side of the overall economy is still robust in the nation. I would say locally we are starting to see some softness, both in that accommodations and restaurant side, because our occupancy numbers are down a bit. So what does that mean overall? Right now we're looking at more or less a flat projection for 2023 at this point, which is still ahead of budget because we didn't set our budget quite as high before the year ended in 22. So we've actually picked up a little bit ahead of what we thought we would do for the year at this point. And right now for 2024, we're actually projecting just under 2% growth. If you compare that to the long-range average on our sales tax, which is closer to about 5.5%, we're still kind of dampened a bit. But that is also consistent with kind of the national expectations that a recession isn't really anticipated this year, maybe a mild one in the early parts of next year at this point. In terms of another revenue stream, the real estate transfer taxes, this is really something we've been preaching about for the last number of quarters, that the inventory is way down, and you can see the drops we've been experiencing relative to 22 at this point. Please keep in mind that 2022 was the third highest collection period on record, and just barely in the number 3 spot. It was actually just right up next to 2020, which was second highest. So overall, we are at about $7.5 million in the housing RET to date. That's through the first half of the year, and a little shy of $4 million in the Arts and Culture Fund. We're expecting that still to grow, but definitely a lot less than the last number of years. We're expecting around $12 million in the Housing Fund for this year, half of that again in the Arts and Culture Fund. And right now, my best guess is to hold that flat at best for 2024. We will see how things progress and if inventory starts to turn around or anything of that nature. We obviously have high mortgage rates right now. I will say, though, that most of the purchases locally are not done through a mortgage process, unless it's the affordable housing side, which we don't collect a lot of taxes on. So, on the lodging tax side, we are currently up about 6% above 2021, but it's dropping again. January and February were much stronger at the start of the year. You can see in that lower graph on the far right. The price increases that we experienced from 19 to 23 were just astounding. And so as occupancy held fairly close to the levels they were in 2019 in those periods, and such a high increase on the average nightly rate, the money was coming in. But you could see in the last couple of months especially, obviously prices have subsided quite a bit, although they're still well above 2019 levels for those months. But our occupancy numbers are also actually declining a bit, and advanced bookings are down. So we are seeing some pushback at this point. I think we are starting to see a little bit of a relationship in the elasticity between price and occupancy, and how those things will eventually move in different directions. If one goes up too high, the other one starts to give. Then, kind of talking a little bit more at a philosophical level instead of a dollars and cents level at this point, I just wanted to flash up there the general purpose property tax and talk through that a little bit. Obviously, there has been some significant increases in actual value of homes in the community and across the state, probably across a lot of the nation at this point. So in terms of home wealth, that has gone up quite a bit. Where that starts to play a rub on the tax liability side, obviously, is how does that translate into your property tax that the community may need to help fund different areas. Our property tax bill, in aggregate, if you looked at a property downtown, only about 14% of somebody's total property tax goes to the city of Aspen, and that's an important note. The school district, the hospital, the county all have mill levies as well, and those things start stacking on top of each other, which makes that property tax bill much higher. Obviously, this body only governs one piece of that then, so our local mill levy as well. So it's a little early to make any determinations yet about where our property taxes revenue could peg. I can tell you that on the general purpose property tax side, obviously we are limited by Tabor. It's the only tax revenue stream that's limited by Tabor for the city. And that Tabor formula says that our revenues cannot increase faster than the combined percentage of the inflationary increase plus any new construction growth as a percentage of the total value of property in the city. We do know the inflation number already, and it's a little over 8%. It was 8.011%. So that means our revenue could at least grow by 8% at this point. And then the new growth factor, I looked at the last, I think it was a little more than a decade worth of new growth percentages. It averages 1.8% if you look over the cumulative of the last decade plus. The highest year was about 3.5%. So you had years that were actually a little bit negative or just in a percentage or two. So we don't have that percentage yet. I'll have a preliminary estimate by the end of August from the county assessor, but that doesn't really get firmed up until December. Yeah, it is December as the latest date that the county can share that with us. We do typically get it sometime around Thanksgiving. We'll have to see how overwhelmed they may be or not in terms of finalizing that number this year. But overall, I would say, my rough estimate right now would be a roughly 10% increase in the revenue stream under the general purpose property tax is possible. This council can obviously institute a greater mill levy credit than what would be needed just to limit to the 10%-ish or whatever that number is. So the council can dampen that further on its own. And that is not a permanent dampening, it's just a one-year temporary credit. So there is some flexibility. Yeah.
I have some questions on that. As I understand, Tabor, if we lower the levy, we can't raise it again without a new tax.
So you have to be intentional about instituting a temporary mill levy credit, which is what we do every year to honor Tabor.
In the temporary credit, could you explain that to me? Because we've had a big increase in the property values. Mm-hmm. And if the mill levy stays where it was then that's a huge windfall, but it's a big burden on the property owners. So I think what we've in the past done is try to make the burden as little as possible, yet receive the funding that we need for our general fund projects. So it's a balancing act of property values increase, mill levy has to make some kind of an adjustment, and that's done through a credit. Could you explain exactly what the credit is?
So basically what we do is we back into what the reduction to the number of mills needs to be to essentially hit the revenue figure that Tabor has always allowed us to collect. So property taxes often will go up in double digits. So maybe a 12% increase, 15% increase in value. Then you apply the assessment rate, and I have those up on the screen for whether it's residential or non-residential, and that is your then taxable value to apply the mills to. So our full mill levy is 5.41 mills on the general purpose property tax. We have consistently instituted a credit of about 1.4, 1.2 It depends on the year. It moves up and down based on how fast the assessments or the actual values go up or down. But we usually discount our 5.41 mils down to about 4 mils. So we only charge 4 mils out instead of our full maximum. And again, that's because Tabor restricts us. So we have always done that at this point.
So we're not really decreasing the mill levy, we're in essence giving a credit to the homeowner for a percent or a few percent?
You are decreasing the number of mills you are charging, and it's temporary for that year. Does that make sense?
Well, I understand,
Okay.
it's just the mechanism you use and the vernacular you use to do it. And I understand that the credit is to lessen the burden on the taxpayer, yet for the city to get the funds it needs without lowering the mill levy that would require a Tabor to raise it again.
Yeah. We are definitely not, we are not lowering anybody's value of their home or their taxable value of home because that's set by the county. We are strictly adjusting for a one-year purpose the number of mills that we are charging or applying.
And what percentage of our city budget is the general fund that is funded by property taxes?
So the total collection on the general purpose property tax is about 9 to 10 million in a given year for us. And that goes to 2 different funds. It goes to the general fund and to the asset management plan fund, which is our capital fund. And that is truly the only real resource, especially in the capital asset management plan fund. So all of our streets, our bridges, our general fund fleet needs, our rec center capital until, I think council gave us direction this year to shift those costs over to the parks fund, which was advantageous for that fund because it is getting stretched very thin with the limited resources going in there.
So roughly 10% of 140 million or something like that?
Our total budget is about 140-ish million, 140, 150 million.
Okay, so that's our target number, to get that with a credit. Thank you, Pete. That's me.
Pete, I have a follow-on question towards, if that's all right.
Sure.
On the Tabor limit, the new growth component of the equation, is that based on residential units versus the prior year? Or what, could you explain that new growth component a little bit more?
Yeah, you'll have additions and growth in terms of when you'll have a property have a scrape and replace type item, or you'd have actually just new development, which Aspen doesn't have quite as much of. Obviously, we have limited space, limited land to redevelop or develop new. So there's typically a major improvement, or it will be a total rebuild.
Okay, but if one residential unit is demolished and replaced with one residential unit, is that new growth, or is that a net zero?
Well, it typically becomes new growth because it is usually a build period and it doesn't happen within the given time frame. So it'll often be a deletion in a prior year and then an addition as new growth in the future year.
Understood, thanks. And do deed restricted units count as new growth?
Yes, it still has value under the property side.
Okay, so even though there's a sort of artificially reduced appraised value and therefore tax burden, it is increasing the Tabor limit.
Yeah, it is still definitely a discounted actual value based on the assessor's rating, and basically will limit the amount of tax revenue as a result.
Okay, I think I'm following you, although I'm not sure I agree exactly with what you just said. It actually, it disproportionately affects free market property owners because it raises the Tabor limit if we create new deed restricted units, because that counts as new growth.
Excuse me. You'll have new property, new taxable property being developed regardless, whether it's free market or subsidized and affordable housing. So I don't think there's a difference whether it's affordable housing unit or not otherwise. It doesn't affect the value of the.
What I'm taking away and what I'm learning here, which I did not know, is that let's ignore free market new growth for a given year. If we create 200 new deed restricted units in a year, and that's our new growth as a community for the whole year, we are raising the Tabor limit and therefore allowing all properties to be taxed at a greater level, even though those 200 units do not really contribute proportionately to the tax burden.
I think I understand.
You know,
I think I understand what you're saying.
We can talk about this later.
Yeah.
But, it's just interesting to me. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, just for the rest of council, I want to clarify, that's not my understanding of how Tabor is working, but maybe some more conversation with Bill, we can understand where in that process he's thinking that there's a shift burden. Tabor's been pretty clear, and the assessor's office has been really clear about how they assess the deed restricted properties. So there's been a long time precedent of how that applies. That's congruent with the purchase price and the rate of growth of the value of the property under the deed restriction.
We, as a city, have two different mill levies, obviously, and the general purpose property tax is the first one we spoke about. We have a Clean River, which we also call the Stormwater Program, and it has its own mill levy. The order of magnitude is substantially less, 0.65 mils versus the 5.41 mils on the general purpose side. So we're not talking nearly as much in terms of financial impacts to the city or to the individuals. But that said, this particular revenue stream is not limited by Tabor. Voters adopted the ballot question without that restriction. The city had adhered to Tabor for a number of years, but in 2018, the council decided to lift that limitation, largely because the program was significantly underfunded. There's a lot of infrastructure need for the stormwater program. And so this was a way to help gain a few extra dollars into that program. That certainly was not at a time frame, however, when properties went up, let's pick the number 60, 70%, whatever the number is going to turn out to be. So for that reason, you can see that last year, for the collection year this year right now, we're expecting 1.3 million in collections based on the actual assessed values. If that goes up by 50%, 60%, that can have the exact same effect on the revenue stream, obviously. So it's something to be aware of, and really with that, I wanted to keep this question in the slide deck to know if the council did have any questions or any insight ahead of getting the actual information from the actual preliminary information from the county assessor. If you had any concerns with how that would translate, especially on the stormwater side. Like I said, it's a much smaller mill levy, so it doesn't have as large of an impact if it goes up at a more rapid pace, but that is something to be aware of. Did you have any?
Just a quick, stormwater treatment, corrugated metal pipes are considered part of the stormwater treatment?
The corroded metal pipes, yes, that is correct.
I need more information. I don't really understand setting our mill levy ahead of valuations. I don't get it.
Yeah, I guess my biggest question was, for planning purposes, we could assume no more than, pick the number, 10% growth on that revenue stream, 20% growth on that revenue stream. Right now, I mean, if the actual values went up by 50 to 60%, right now that's what the revenue stream would peg to. So I was just curious to know if the council had any guidance ahead of the information. Obviously, I will bring that back to the council as soon as I get that.
And for clarity is that we don't necessarily know actuals on this for quite a while.
Yeah.
So if you're waiting on information for us to refine our revenue estimate, it is extremely late in the budgeting process that we will probably be able to do that. And that's why we're asking up front is, do you want us just to run standard course, which the up years are up and the down years are down? Or do you want to put some safeguards around that, given the volatility of the real estate market, which, as you've heard, there were so many appeals, right, to evaluation, which will likely bring, some of those I think will get granted. I don't know how many. But that's just really the cases. Just like how the RET's highly volatile, what's happening right now with the entire real estate market in town, your property tax revenue sources are becoming volatile, and you're gonna hit a spike up with the reassessment. Now, again, it's not a big source of revenue for the city. The county, on the other hand, is highly dependent on these property taxes. So if you would like us to say, we're not necessarily consider capturing all of that spike of growth for this programmatic areas, then we're just asking for you to signal to that, because I don't want to go develop with staff a capital plan based upon what we think is a 40 or 50% growth in this revenue source, when particularly like when I'm modeling things like issuing debt for certain projects that are of high importance to the council, if you're really going to come back and say, hey, we're going to pull that revenue source down. That's really what we're getting at with these questions.
Sarah and Pete, can I ask a clarifying question? When you're referencing the 40 to 50% potential growth, are you talking about the stormwater improvement revenue or the 5.4 general purpose property tax, or both?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It is just for the stormwater program because it is not limited by the Tabor revenue growth requirement. So.
Okay, well.
So I gave you a
thanks.
bad example, Bill. My apologies. So it's really
No, I just
your
wanted, I
20
wanted to make
million
sure
of
everyone's on the
delayed
same
capital
page.
in this,
Yep.
in your stormwater program.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So I'm happy to jump in with my personal feelings and direction here, and then explain one of the major reasons why.
Yeah.
So I think I understand the infrastructure needs on the stormwater side, and I'm supportive of taking the opportunity to collect some revenue there to allow us to do some projects. I don't think that means we need to take every last drop of that opportunity. So I would be supportive of some limiter on that, to be reasonable on the taxes that we're collecting in a year that is going to be painful for some people. On the general property side, sort of feel the same way. This is not going to be a windfall to the city in any event because of the Tabor limitation, but I do think that it would be nice if we helped the community out and backed off the maximum that we could do. So, on both of these things, is 75% of the 100% total possible collection the right number? I don't know, but that's kind of where I'm thinking. And there's kind of two aspects to it. I think everybody's thinking about this as your residential property tax bill, and the property taxes that you're paying on your house, but it's more than that. This impacts residential rent, right? Residential rent definitely includes a component of the property tax that the landlord is paying, and so next year's rent will go up if the landlord gets a tax bill that's 15 or 20% higher than it was last year. So this will directly influence residential rent costs in Aspen and Pickens County. It also affects commercial rent. Many, if not all of our, I shouldn't say all, many of the commercial property tenants in Aspen are on what's called a triple net lease. And they, the tenants have to pay the property tax bills, no matter what they are. They're just passed on directly to the tenant. The tenant gets a reconciliation from the landlord, and they pay that. And what ends up happening if those costs go up is that the product and services costs that these tenants provide to our community go up. So I think we should be mindful of those additional effects of this decision.
Thanks, Bill.
So council, let's say, for example, you limited the stormwater growth to 40%. You're looking at maybe $500,000 more towards your $18 to $20 million backlog in this infrastructure for the community. Now, that is an ongoing increase, remember. So that is we'd have to see what construction costs are looking like, but just to kind of give you a sense of where those numbers fall. And I'll have Pete double check my math, as he usually does.
Yeah, 10%'s 130,000, right? So.
Pete, about 7% of our overall budget comes from the property tax. So in response to Bill, it costs government more. I mean, we're affected by inflation as much as anybody else, perhaps more. Every project that we send out to bid has been coming back substantially higher than what we had budgeted for and expected. So although we as a government have to try to break even, so if there's a 10% or 8% increase because of inflation, I think that we should project at least an 8% increase in the property taxes. And the ripple effect is, yeah, it's going to affect rents, but that's what inflation does. It affects every sector. So by increasing a property tax, it does affect rent prices, but that's, I mean, it's all connected. And as far as the stormwater is concerned, I would, if we have it would be a huge windfall if we did not make some kind of a credit adjustment on the property taxes. But I think that's too much of a burden to put on the property owners. So I think that we should set the limit somewhere around 10%. 8% is inflation, so somewhere in that neighborhood. But as far as the stormwater 0.6 mill levy, I would, I'm not sure what that means for an individual homeowner, but it's a pretty small amount. I think that you're saying it's 1.3 million that's coming in. I would support as a full increase of the stormwater section, and that's just 0.65 mils. Because we are way behind on funding.
So what if I bring back, Mr. Mayor, some examples in the budget process, and we'll show you what the different cap levels will do, and we can add that with the construction inflationary costs that we're seeing that affect this fund as well. Because you've got about $2 million worth of capital over at least the next 3 years in this fund already planned, and that was these numbers a year ago. So if I put on construction inflation index on there, I've got easily several $10,000 more, probably 20 to 30,000 just in inflationary costs on that $3 million.
Yeah, just put a little context on this. We have an aging community. We have a number of retired people that are on fixed incomes. There's certainly a large number of people that are not, but it puts a burden on somebody that is on a fixed income to have a increase in their property taxes. So I'm cognizant of that, and I think we need to get the revenue. We need to keep city going, but we don't need to take a windfall.
You can give me a moment for a shameless plug of, we have a low-income senior property tax exemption program as well. So we do have the ability to, for those that are at the very low end of the spectrum, discount their property tax bill.
I think the sentiment on council is for exactly what you said, to bring back some real numbers and examples, and we'll make some decisions then. It sounds like we are interested in looking at some sort of cap, some sort of credit.
Okay, great. If we're...
Sam, did you have input?
Yeah, just a very simple sentence of I think we should provide relief where we can, and was wondering if you had any knowledge about CMC reducing their mill levy and why they were able to do it so early in the game, and yeah.
So I don't have any insight into what the other entities are doing, and everybody, I mean, they have a singular mill levy. Some entities have multiple levies and have different limiters or non-limiters on their particular streams. So CMC does have certain other revenue streams that are also significant. Some tax revenue from the state, for instance, that really can backfill maybe if they curb some of their expectations on other revenues where, you know, our fund structure has certain tax revenues that maybe could otherwise support this, but are dedicated for other uses, takes them off the table.
Okay, so just different situations for different mill levies. And then two really quick questions on the actual slides themselves. I was just wondering, how do automobile sales factor into it when there's no car dealership in Aspen?
Yep, so right now our code says the finalization of the sale of an automobile happens at the time of registration. So basically it's the same process as a use tax, where you go to register your car to use it. So we're basically deeming the sale to be final at that point in time. And that's why the sales tax is collected here. It's why it's not collected in Denver, nor is a use tax or any other tax in Denver, so.
Learn something new every day. And then the other part, allocation of tax collections, I was wondering why housing development was down 44% and Kids First was up 37.54%.
Yep, that was due to last year, right before we finalized the budget, we came to the council and discussed the opportunity to build the new child care center at Burlingame. And we basically needed to find ways to start pushing money towards that fund to help pay for that. And right now, the source of revenue in the Kids First program is a shared tax revenue between housing and Kids First. It used to be a 45-55 split. We changed it to a 25-75 split through that process. So that was not needing voter approval. The council had the purview to change that percentage on its own. So we shifted a whole bunch more money into the Kids First fund going forward.
Got it, thank you.
Okay?
Yep.
So shifting into the planning for next year, and I also have Courtney who's going to join me for a little bit. I have 2 slides for you, and then I'll turn it over to her. Basically, this is a bit of a refresher for some of our seasoned folks on the council, and just basically a quick statement for the new folks. We basically do a continuation-based budgeting process in the city of Aspen, which is very common. The state does it. Almost every municipality tries to implement this. And basically what that is basically saying whatever your funding is for the current year, you bring that forward, assuming all those services are continuing and supporting those at that level. But you remove any one-time requests, or if you had any things that were partial year that annualized for a full year, you'd build that in. And that's kind of your base level of funding. If you have cost escalation above and beyond what's in there, if you have new initiatives, if you have new mandates, those things don't fit often into that bucket of resources because you're basically providing the same level you did in the past and assuming those costs are flat. And so that's when we transition out of what's considered the base budget and we move into what's considered the supplemental request process. The advantage of that is a full transparency on why the budget is growing, essentially. We do packets with detailed analysis about what the ask is, why it's there, how much does it cost, and then there's a decision point item for the council. So what I wanted to just chat with you, we wanted to chat with you, is about kind of setting that base budget, which is, again, removing everything forward, last year's funding forward to support the current operations. But we have an exception for what we basically build into that base. So we bring over the same dollar amounts, but as we all know and as we've talked about, inflationary pressures and labor costs don't stay static from one year to the next. So the exception we make in the base budget is coming to council and saying, we need to account for these things that say, you know, a pencil today is going to cost a little bit more than it did yesterday or last year. So we still need the pencil. How much is that going to cost us? So this is your graph of either Mount Daly or something else, I don't know, one of our local peaks, or inflation, whichever way you want to look at it. I did put the yellow highlight in there for the latest number that just came out last week, which was May's number for inflationary pressure is up 3% year over year. So the city's really absorbed these pretty astronomical increases in costs for the last couple of years. Last year we did this year I guess it was, a 4% increase on goods and services. Prior to that, we were only doing 2%. So our budget's been getting tighter and tighter, and the teams have found ways to be more efficient and prioritization. And that is starting to dwindle. Obviously, we are still kind of coming off the tail end of these high numbers, but it's definitely coming down based on Fed action. And so with that, right now, we have our proposal for 2024, which is only a 2.5% increase on the goods and services lines in the city's budget. So I wanted to make sure that council was okay with that 2.5%. That's really close to the Fed target, essentially, of the 2% long-run average that they peg. That's where they're trying to move to. I actually think they're going to get there fairly soon. I'm a little worried that they've stamped on the brakes a little too hard and haven't let up yet. So I do anticipate another Fed rate hike in the coming meeting. So we'll see how that plays out in the long run. But at this point, we would build in a 2.5% increase into the base budget for 2024. And then on the labor side, yeah.
Before we go to labor, I just want to take a minute to, particularly Bill or Sam, if you have any questions on this. So good and services are all contractual purchases for the city. Some of them you see at the council table, some of them that we handle administratively under the procurement code. But the goods and services, can you remind me, do you know, like, off the top of your head, the percentage of the 140 million that's good and services?
Labor costs are about 32 million, 33 million. Okay. So everything else is.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure we understood scale of what we're talking about, changing the base budget on. And again, this is slower than what we did last year, where we were just seeing out of control inflation hitting our valley, really hitting the country, but particularly in the valley. As there was the labor shortage, so services in particular were skyrocketing over year basis.
And I will say, you can take out all the project costs from the total budget number of 140 million, because that's another 40 to 50 million projects that we do independently and price those out based on their scope and design. So
I think I understand it. I appreciate it.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Courtney DeVito, Human Resources Director, and I'm here with Pete tonight to talk a little bit more about the employee side and our projections and recommendations for 2024. So as a starting point, I wanted to just briefly review with you our total compensation philosophy. And this goes back to June of 2021 when we were involved in our compensation and classification study. And we built our total compensation philosophy as a framework that helps guide our organization to creatively put together compensation and benefit recommendations to our city staff. And this we see as a recruitment and retention tool that also makes us an employer of choice in our area. Everything on the wheel on the right-hand side of the page there is everything that's included in our total compensation philosophy. So that's everything from your straight pay to your benefits and learning and growth opportunities within the organization, and so much more than that. And so we're in the process now of planning for 2024 for health insurance. It might seem a little early, but we do have to start this at this point. So for the past 2 years, so in 2022 and in 2023, we were able to not increase our employee premiums, so keeping the rates exactly the same for staff. As we plan for 2024, as is in this discussion this evening, talking about inflationary costs, we've seen a considerable increase in healthcare costs in our valley and in our surrounding areas where our employees receive care. And we've also seen our staff more actively using our plan, now more so than in years prior. So with that said, for 2024, we are looking at employee health premium increases of 8%. So again, that's on the employee side. And then on the employer side, we are looking at a 10% increase. With all of that, however, we are still recommending maintaining a $0 employee premium. So only adding a premium increase on to staff who add dependents to the plan, be that children, spouses, or family members. Maintaining that 0% employee premium is really important. It's a great staff retention tool and something that people look for when looking to see where they may want to work and keeping us as an employer of choice. Being that we are a self-funded health plan, meaning we as the organization provide the health insurance to our employees, and we're not part of a larger group like a United Healthcare or a Blue Cross Blue Shield, those larger companies that you hear of, we can work on our plan design as needed and pivot where necessary to get ready for 2024 and make any design changes that we would like to. What is specifically on our radar for next year is looking at a new pharmacy vendor that will allow for city staff on the plan to have more access to local pharmacies, which we're missing right now. And then as we talk about 2024 total compensation, taking a step back, in 2023, we were able to offer a 3% cost of living adjustment. So again, things are more expensive here. So we were able to implement that in January of 2023, while also continuing to offer up to 4% merit, which is performance-based. So essentially, in 2023, we were offering up to a 7% increase for all employees. For 2024, we are recommending up to a 7% increase based on performance and rewarding employees for work worth doing and jobs well done. And while it's a little bit early on deciding everything for 2024, we do have a few data points from across the Roaring Fork Valley. And in comparison to what we know as of right now, we believe that 7% will assist in recruitment and retention from a merit standpoint. And our final bullet point up there is something that we're currently working on. These are two policies that are information only at this time for you that we are trying to get over the finish line here really soon, but also a recruitment and retention tool. The first being a multilingual bonus policy. And so that would apply to staff who are utilizing either fluency in Spanish or American Sign Language as part of their everyday work here at the city to provide translation or interpretation services to both internal and external customers, and they would be rewarded with a monetary bonus. And then the second program and policy that we're working on is paid parental leave. And that would allow for up to 8 weeks of paid leave for an employee for the birth, adoption, or foster care placement of a child. And paid parental leave is part of a larger national conversation right now that perhaps you've heard about, and we're excited to potentially implement this very soon. With both of those policies, we don't anticipate there to be any budget requests of council at this time.
Word question on that?
Yeah, Courtney, going back to the healthcare, and I mentioned this to you briefly before the meeting about mental health and the impacts it's had not only for the well-being of the individual, but for the economic impact of people missing work because of mental health issues. The ongoing costs of pharmaceutical treatment for this, that there are some, particularly ketamine has been shown to be very effective in some mental health and anxiety treatment and therapy. And MDMA looks like within the next year or so that is going to be legal treatment. So I would encourage the city to have an open mind about covering ketamine treatment with an eye on MDMA coming up. I can offline, Courtney, I mentioned a company that is doing this kind of providing. It's called Inthea. And they're working with some of the very large corporations that have a lot of employees, and the economic impact of mental health is great. And if we can increase our retention and the well-being of our employees through the use of ketamine treatment, I would like to explore that. And on the horizon, I think it was Prop 122 for the plant-based therapy, psilocybin is probably further back, maybe years behind for mainstreaming and being legal. But again, clinically has been proven to be very effective as a therapy for PTSD, anxiety, addictive behaviors. So I'd like to see the city being able to offer that kind of therapy.
Yeah, thank you. And I can assure you, we are definitely looking at, from a mental health standpoint, where we can tie more things into our wellness-based program as well.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney.
Courtney, I have a question on that second last slide there, please. On the second bullet point, are you suggesting the merit alone should be up to 7% and therefore a 10% total compensation increase for 24, or does that include the cost of living adjustment?
Thank you. Yeah, to clarify, it is just up to 7% merit, and that would include what we had done previously as a COLA, but we were focused on employee performance, so there will not be a separate COLA. It will be 7%, up to 7% for merit-based performance.
Thank you. Two follow-on questions. One is, what percentage of staff resignations in the last 12 months have been due to seeking greater compensation elsewhere?
In terms of percentage, I can't say exactly at this time, but I can certainly follow up with that percentage for you. But we have staff who do turn over from our organization for various reasons. We do hear compensation. We also do hear cost of living and other opportunities outside of our area, both public and private sector.
Okay, I'd love some more data on the compensation piece of that. Of course, cost of living is obvious and has been a recent issue, but specifically on compensation, I'd like to know what we're losing to the private sector particularly, or other governments. I doubt we can get that granular, but I'd love to understand that a little bit better.
So
and then, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Bill.
Yeah.
We will go ahead and circulate the memo when the compensation plan was implemented that provides what was agreed upon by the council at that time as directive of what meets a comparable organization, so that you have the underlying policy work, Bill, which will probably be more critical than the outcome work for what you're asking right now. The key thing that happened is when those changes happened in 2021, we were using comparables that were not where we actually were hiring employees from. So we were looking at Telluride and Steamboat, places like that, when we needed to start looking particularly at the Front Range, where that's a more likely place where we'll have someone relocate from to be employed by us, as well as we have 2 benchmarks here in the Roaring Fork Valley that go with that. So there's a total of a core group of benchmark communities that we look for. There are specific positions that we will look at private sector for, because that work is more prevalent in the private sector. A good example is when we look at the arts and culture area, where there's more likely nonprofit and private sector comparables rather than other public sector comparables. So it varies by position, and if there's a particular area you'd like us to focus on that we can pull data from within that research time period that we can do for that 2-hour period, we'd be happy to do that for you.
Thanks. I appreciate all of what you said, but what I'm trying to understand is, are we losing employees still? Because I think we're on the downslope of wage inflation, not on the upslope. And if the proof's in the pudding, if people are leaving because they're not earning enough, we need to do something aggressive. If they're not, then maybe we don't need to do what we did last year. So This is kind of real-time data. You know, what's happening in the last 6 to 12 months in your organization. That's what I'm interested in.
And so we can follow up and have some conversation. I think the other piece I would like to add to that is the housing pressure has not slowed down. And so when it's still unfortunately, you'll miss the housing retreat tomorrow where we'll be showing typical sales prices over the last 6 months throughout the valley. Our wages are not consistent with anyone living between here and Carbondale to buy a free market single-family home. And so maybe they can buy a multifamily unit or buy a small condo down valley, but the wages do not allow free market housing, which is truly the #1 hurdle we hear back from staff.
Understood. Thanks. And then, Courtney, on the American Sign Language bonus, where is this? Where does this come from? Where's the demand in the community for American Sign Language services coming from? How many people are we serving with that?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm happy to clarify. So the higher demand is on the Spanish-speaking side, most certainly, just based
Understood.
on second language spoken in our valley here. American Sign Language is something that, as an employer, we should be providing when we have public meetings, things like that. And so right now, we don't have a lot of staff members, obviously, who are fluent in American Sign Language, but we are looking to expand that program for when it's necessary. So while it's a small part of a need in our community, it is something that we do want to explore.
Why do we want to explore that? Is there is there state law that says we have to have an interpreter on all of our public meetings? I just don't understand what the impetus is.
Well, thankfully, at this point, there is not that requirement. However, where we are finding is that we have a visitor population that interacts with us for services, particularly in recreation and parks, things in that area where these additional skill sets are highly valued. We also see it a lot in permitting, where someone's trying to understand permitting requirements when English is not their primary language. So, but taking a look at what the needs are, the notion that we do have some regular populations in the community that will benefit from these services, and the monetary expense to the city is rather small, but it is a significant recognition to an employee of a secondary critical skill that they have, and for continuation of development of that skill if it's not their primary language.
Okay, I'd be really curious if there's any sort of data that substantiates the desire for the city of Aspen as an organization to provide that service.
And Commissioner Guth, just to follow up on this a little bit, if we are asked to make an accommodation for somebody that requires sign language, that is an analysis we have to undertake. And so just to follow up on your question, if it's required, certainly we would evaluate the certain facts of any particular situation, but it may be the case that legally speaking, it is a service we may have to provide. So,
well, I appreciate that, Kate. And if there were 10 people asking us for it, you know, I want the Community Development Department to be providing American Sign Language, then obviously that's an analysis we have to do per ADA. I get that. But is there anyone asking? I'm curious. I don't know the answer to that.
Can I make a quick statement? Yeah. I think, Bill, this would be a really helpful tool for the police department. If we had an emergency where a deaf person was involved, sign language would be very helpful. That's just an example.
Again, John, I'm not taking a position that it's a good or a bad thing. I'm curious where the demand comes from. You know,
because we have tourist visitors who have hearing issues. Some of them are hearing impaired.
But we also have tourist visitors that speak Chinese and not English. There's unlimited demand to accommodate everybody in this world, right? And it's a nice notion to try to do so, but I don't think it's feasible.
If I may, I can elaborate. Alyssa Farrell again, Administrative Services Director. We are looking at our demographics, and able to provide services to a community that may not have requested the services necessarily, but they may request them and come forward now that they're available. And really looking and assessing our demographics is our priority, and why we're piloting Spanish and ASL, American Sign Language, to begin with. It may be expanded upon, and again, it's based on need of our community and really focusing on our community service. So that's where the need comes from exactly, and to elaborate, it's as needed for these services and based on community members and customers that are coming in and receiving services. So it's meeting the needs, again, of our marginalized communities that you may not explicitly hear from. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa. So does that mean there's data that shows how many ASL speakers there are in our community?
We'll go check the census data to see how many report that as a primary language for you. We're unable to provide you that information for the visitor population, but we can check with Challenge Aspen on the percentage of their attendees in town that are deaf and provide you that information as well.
I think it'd be
Thanks.
useful.
Yeah, I just, so, you know, maybe there's some other need that's a greater need. I really don't know. It just like seems like we cannot be all things to all people. We are not an enormous organization, and these things cost money and they take time. And again, these are noble ideals. I don't disagree with that, but
we're talking about
it's impossible.
$6,000 at most with ASL pay, and most likely 3. So I just don't think in the scheme of 140 million that I would be too concerned about this when we look at the benefits package. I'd be much more interested in the council's feedback about the up to 7% on merit, knowing that it's 425,000 per 1%.
Yeah, perhaps I'm speaking philosophically because, you know, we start with this and then it becomes, do we need to broadcast every meeting with an ASL interpreter? I don't know, but if we're going to do these types of things, I want them to be backed by data saying they need to be done. So again, I got nothing. I understand that it's de minimis dollars in the grand scheme of things. I'm just concerned about the precedent and the philosophy of the effort that's going into it.
And I would add, we are, I understand what you're saying. There's nothing excessive in this request, and I understand it's a reasonable request, meeting the needs of our community and providing accessibility where and when required and potentially needed.
I'd like to chime in here. I think Bill's getting at a philosophical question that I think all of us have dealt with at some point at some time, and that is, what is the role of government? How much government is needed and how much is too much? And I think Bill is asking that question of, is this the role of government? Perhaps I'm putting words into his mouth, but I see this as a, you know, how much government is too much and what is expected, and then to balance that out with dollar costs of $3,000 to $6,000 on a $140 million budget. I don't see it as a gateway to offering a lot more services, but I think it's a legitimate question that we all have to deal with, is what is the role of government?
Thanks, Ward. Yes.
I was going to move on. I was going to answer the merits question. It's around $3 million in this budget. I would just want to say I agree with it as long as it's in the budget and we can afford it, because I do think it's a noble thing to keep and retain happy and healthy employees. So that's my direction.
Sam, you're going to get a lot of work sessions on the budget coming up. We'll see it for a long time.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah. Just for this one, for up to 7%, I feel like I have no reason to go against it. I have no numbers to understand anything differently, and it makes sense to me as to why the number is 7% from what you've presented.
Thank you. Thanks. Other counselor input?
Yeah, I just want to thank staff for everything that went into this. I actually not for personal reasons, but I'm excited about the parental leave pay policies. I think that's really important, and that'll help us retain employees, and plus it's just the right thing to do. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with what these 7% is fine with me. And I'd just like to point out that and reiterate that we're in the same market for employees from the public and private sector, and that we have to be competitive in both of those markets. And I think Sarah has highlighted that, but I know a few years ago we would look for comps for salary just in the public sector, but it's a different world. It's not a static world, and so I'm appreciative of the TCP, total compensation
Correct.
package, and the increase, the merit increase is suggested.
Bill, input on the 7% or budget assumptions?
Yeah, I'd really like that requested data before I feel comfortable on that, in understanding a little bit about what the recent pattern of resignations or job transfers based on compensation have been would be helpful to me.
Okay.
Thanks.
I mean, you have support from council, a majority of council to move forward. I don't know about this. You know, I look to you guys. This is what you do. This is your area of expertise. This is extremely complicated and involved. So from, you know, the policy direction, we talked about this years ago that we want to be highly competitive, but not just that, we want to take care of our people. Yeah, retention is more difficult now than ever. Recruitment is more difficult now than ever. So, you know, from a policy level, I support you guys in the work that you're doing. I really can't chime in on 7%, 6%, 8%. I have to trust in the work that you're doing. And I can tell by the presentations that you give us that you put in an enormous amount of thought and research into what you're bringing to us. So with that, I'm going to be supportive of the direction that we're going. I respect Bill in his request for some more information. So when we can get that to him and us, that'd be great. You know, my questions around this are also structural. You know, is it sustainable? Are we on a path that's sustainable for us? Maybe numbers that I would want to see is just comparables of are there industry standards for government organizations about how much of a budget goes to personnel and staff and compensate? You know, I just don't know. And we're all so different that it would be it probably is very difficult to come up with that, because you have places that have more capital needs than personnel needs, and then you have other places that are just the opposite and have nothing but personnel needs way over their capital needs. So it's very difficult for me to make decisions about things like this, so I trust in the professionals that we have doing it.
All right. That's all I have for you and Council Mayor. Any other questions of us while we're here?
No, I guess I would just want to make a statement. The other day in our meeting, I asked Pete to see if he could find any information about internet sales, internet services, and the like. What I see from our year-to-date reporting, and without going back to it, I'm just going to kind of talk about it. What I see is that the business sectors that are up in our community, specifically here, were health and beauty.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, from my conversations around town, I hear that those businesses that are most successful right now are ones that are not the luxury retail sales, or not even necessarily the luxury accommodations and restaurants. The ones that are really booming and benefiting are those that are more locally priced, if you'd say, or community supportive perhaps. So it's very interesting to me, and I asked Pete just to see what are trends gonna be. Just in the past 2 weeks, I believe that there's one restaurant and one high-end retail that have closed their doors, and we're in the middle of summer. So I just wanted to make a statement that, Aspen, we keep talking about the fact that Aspen may be pricing itself out of our success. I think that is becoming true. I think that the previous council was really astute to have an eye on, and Pete, as always, has an eye on, what's our trend going to look like. Very conservative budget estimating, because we know that it feels as if we're hitting a ceiling. You look at our average daily rate for lodging, my goodness. The only people that can come here and visit in those accommodations are obviously at the high end of the traveler spectrum. So I just wanted to make a statement that, Aspen needs to be careful. We have seen rents in our commercial core doubling, tripling over just the last couple of years. Home prices obviously extremely expensive. Restaurants now are following suit, and retail is going the same way. So I think that we all need to be conservative in how we look at the future, because we are putting ourselves at a very precarious price point. That's all. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate the information. I always am a fan of budget season. It's where the rubber hits the road, and these are some of the difficult but rewarding decisions that we make. So thank you so much for all the information.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I think that is our agenda items for the evening. We have just an opportunity for board reports and council updates. So let's start with board reports. Are there anybody that would have an update for us? Go right ahead.
Go right ahead. RAFTA board report. Iron Mountain Place, the RAFTA housing passed an initiative to turn gas-powered heaters to electric ones. They've had a few new hires, up 24.1% ridership year-to-date through May. Staffing should be at a good level, is the quote used, in a couple weeks when a new class of bus drivers graduates, and the bus delivery from the order last year is all done. I don't know what I missed, but that's what I got.
Yeah. The good news was the RAFTA meeting was the shortest we've had in about 4 years. So on that side, it was great. One thing that did come up is Sam threw out the question to RAFTA board members about Main Street and removing and eliminating the parking, and wondering if that could be brought back. Sam talks a little bit about, even timed parking. So if it's a 15-minute run in and run out, if it's a 30-minute time limit, different hours of the day. Anyway, it went to, he kind of asked it of the board, but really I think he was looking for some information from RAFTA and Dan Blankenship and some of the issues therein. And so I sent an email during the meeting to Sarah that just echoed Dan Blankenship's offer to give any input and information that he has regarding that Main Street parking. I think that's the only board report from me as well. So, others?
I've got APSHA Wednesday with Ward and CORE Thursday with.
That's it. You're a busy week.
Yeah.
Any reports, Ward?
No.
Okay. Then under council updates, I needed to bring one item up, is that after our recent meeting regarding a speed limit reduction to 15 miles per hour in the West End, Bill contacted me and shared his thought that he would more enjoy a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit citywide instead of just specific to the West End. The process that we have started has a resolution coming back to us for the West End 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. But I needed to check in with council members to see if really the desire there was to see this citywide. You know, that poses two issues for us. One, it is a different process. It is not done by resolution. It would be done by an ordinance. So we would need that brought back to us by our staff. And the second thing is that, you know, the way that works is that on each entrance to town, you would post a sign that says 15-mile-an-hour speed limit unless otherwise posted. We currently have one that says 20 miles an hour at the Castle Creek Bridge that you probably see every time you drive in and out of town. So at this, I'm just using this as an opportunity. Sarah and staff would need direction if council's real desire was to see this citywide and not just in the West End. We would need to get that from 3 members of council at this table in order to get work on that going on.
So just a quick question. So right now, it's 20 miles an hour throughout the city unless otherwise posted?
Correct.
Except for Main Street, because the lowest speed limit on a state route is 25 miles per hour.
And that will stay that way.
City council cannot effectuate that any lower as long as you're still accepting state funds.
I remember when it was 35, people were going 40.
Yeah, I remember when it became 20 and Tori wanted 18.
Yes, there was some community that did something goofy like 17 miles an hour or whatever, and they did it because it caught people's attention, right?
I'm not interested in setting a new speed limit of 15 throughout the town. I don't think it's warranted through engineering, so I won't go there if the rest of the council doesn't.
Bill, do you want to just share your input?
Yeah, I think that we can easily identify those specific sections that we either can't do anything about or don't want to do or don't feel that it's appropriate. And, you know, other sections include the bridges perhaps and the section of Castle Creek Road going up to the hospital where we might want it to be 20 or 25. But I do think that slowing down in town is a good thing. It's good for pedestrian safety, makes everyone more mindful. We all know that people are always going to drive over the limit by a little bit. So if we take it down to 15 and people go 22, that's a good thing in my mind. So I'm definitely supportive of this.
Thanks, Bill. Sam?
I'm supportive, but with the caveat that we were presented a study that said it wasn't going to make a difference in the West End because people weren't actually speeding. But, I'm going to take that study and interpret it differently and say that if we reduce it to 15, then we might get what we want as far as people driving a little more consciously and safely. But I would not expect any more speeding tickets because of it. I just hope it brings to mind the pedestrian safety that's needed in this community. So 15 is fine with me, but I expect it to be a little more symbolic than actual potentially practical.
Agree.
John, any input?
I'll support it. Yeah, lower speed limit, that works for me.
Right.
It's at 20 now, but 15 might improve people's behavior.
Okay. There's support for us talking about that.
How does the council wish to proceed? I don't know which roads you want 15 or which roads you want something different. I'm going to need that direction to support staff.
So I think we would love to hear back. You put a couple in your email. Cemetery Lane was one that you were suggesting stay at 20 miles an hour.
I wasn't. I was saying if you made this change, are you willing to change these roads that are designed for higher speeds? I've made no recommendations to the council. In fact, my recommendation would be not to do this because it will be such a low enforcement priority. But if you want to discuss it, I need to know whether you want to come back in work session where you can provide more information. But the roadways are currently at speed limits at or below what they're designed for.
I mean, I would love for it to be prepared and brought to us at a regular meeting. If it's an ordinance, we'll probably have to do 2 hearings on it, a first reading and then a second reading. So I would love to just get it to the table and start the conversation.
So the way we'll bring it is that every road goes to 15 And then you will have to say which ones aren't, because I don't have direction.
Okay. Thank you. And then, under, other update, Sarah, I just had a question for you about, 4th of July. Are we going to, visit it together as a council and talk about successes and improvements that we want to make, going forward, or,
Nothing's scheduled. The staff has already had their debriefing for their plans for next year.
okay. I'd be interested to hear those because I thought that there were a couple items that were really great, and then I thought there were a couple items that could be improved upon.
Feel free to email them to me.
Yep.
I don't know that it's a policy conversation at this point.
Yeah, yeah. I'll send you a quick email that has a couple of questions and ideas then. Any other items for council members this evening?
Yes.
Yeah, Bill?
Thanks. I know we've all sort of talked individually about this concept of the 3 city buildings being considered holistically, and those 3 that I'm referring to are the Armory, the old Powerhouse, and the Main Street Cabin, formerly Mountain Rescue. But I think that there would be some good value in the 5 of us discussing it together, and batting some ideas back and forth and seeing if we can take some action on that sooner rather than later. So I'd like to request that either gets scheduled for a work session or request a special meeting on that.
I'll let others chime in about how they feel about it, but, Bill, you know, our priority here is to get the Armory, done and online. So I'm really hopeful that we can move that forward. I don't support buying any more property, if we don't need to. The only item that I would have a question about would be about the Mountain Rescue Cabin on Main Street. But other than that, I don't have, the other 2 pieces of that program are moving forward, I think, as expeditiously as they can. So I don't really need a work session on all 3 of those and changing that dynamic. But I am open to a conversation about the Main Street Cabin and how that plays in.
To be clear, my goal is to move the Armory forward as quickly as possible. And in listening to your feedback amongst others, I'm trying to provide solutions for some of the impediments to expediting the Armory redevelopment. So that's where I'm coming from. I think we're aligned on that, and I'm trying to help us get there.
So give me one example of how could you move up the Armory timeline?
If we can agree on what the use of the Armory is going to be before we spend a bunch of time designing things, that could shave off many months, if not a year. And I think that my proposal does solve for some of those use questions. Again, it's not a concrete proposal. I'm open to any discussion on it, but I'm trying to eliminate some of those variables so that we can move the Armory forward.
So for clarity for council, I reviewed a draft info-only memo that will be in the next regular meeting packet that includes a timeline. We're not spending tons of money. Matter of fact, the council currently hasn't proposed a budget for even fit test work on the space for all the uses. So we are currently working on preparing to bring that information back to you because you need to appropriate funds towards the project for that type of work. Since the scope has changed dramatically in its use. The timeline would be is that you make a decision by the end of this year on the use at the Armory so that we can prepare the necessary documents for the Historic Preservation Commission.
I'm open to perhaps discussing some options for the property formerly known as Mountain Rescue. I definitely don't want to go back into programming of the City Hall, the Armory, and the Powerhouse. I think doing that will delay the delivery of the armory, and I think it's a clear community desire to get the armory for community use as soon as possible.
And also, you will make a decision in October about whether you want to issue debt, which depends whether it takes 5 years or 3 years.
You have any thoughts here?
Yeah, on this one, if there's anything to revisit, I'd love that the Army's moving forward, Mountain Rescue, I like that we can talk about that use. If anything, I would just love to see the old powerhouse not be offices. If there's anything that could be done there, that could be to community space. And I do feel like when we do the armory and we see that we can't put everything we want into it, I feel like the leftovers, the old powerhouse would probably be ideal for it, so, yeah.
I don't want to throw cold water on that, but several years ago, there was a big process down there at that space, and when a public use was mentioned, the neighbors came out of the woodwork. They did not want the noise and the disturbance down there, so not saying it can't be revisited, I'm just saying I wasn't on council at that time, but this has been visited before. I believe that.
And our last conversation on it was with our staff from Capitol saying that they were moving forward with improvements to the building that did not preclude it from being that in the future. My real thing here is like before anything's gonna happen at the Armory, we've got 1.5 years of planning in itself. So, I mean, we need to get that going with the possibility of potential space down there. But right now, in the near term, in the next 1.5 years or 3 years, it will be used as office space. And then it can be determined if it can be moved to more community serving space. But right now, I don't see how we can move any other pieces around to start working on that as community space in the immediate. In the future, I think it can definitely get there, but right now, I don't think we have that option to pursue that.
And there's some.
I think we do have that option, and that there's a valid plan on the table, Tori. Whether you're willing to discuss that or not is a different story, but that is an option, and I think that it will, again, really help to expedite the process of getting the armory planning done efficiently. So if that's your goal, and it certainly is mine, then we need to know whether we're building a hotel or a cruise ship, and right now we don't know what we're doing.
I mean, we went through a long process with our community. We identified what the community has been asking for, and that's the path that we're on. And it's similar to what you say, except you eliminate other uses. You want just food service at the Armory, or from your statements, that's what I've garnered. But that's not what we've heard from our community.
And again, I'm trying to provide for those other uses
somewhere else,
and I'm still our ears somewhere else.
I know, but that's not what the community has said about this. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. If this is a battle between what you want and what your community has been saying, then I don't know what to tell you. Again, where I stumble on what you've brought to the table so far is that you wanted us to buy more office space. Is that not
necessarily? No, that's one option. It's a small piece of the puzzle. I think as I refined it, we could easily keep the departments that are currently housed in the Mountain Rescue building where they are. I think we keep the department that's currently housed upstairs at the old powerhouse where it is. We do the community uses that you and others expressed to me are desired at the Armory in the downstairs of the old powerhouse. We go to a pure food hall model with kiosks for ACRA and the Forest Service in the Armory. And the only entity that displaces is ACRA. And whether we purchase office space for them or they go out and find their own office space is a small piece of this conversation. But everything else is.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Again, Bill, I've got you, Bill, but we can't hear you right now. We heard your last statement, but we can't hear you right now. Can you hear us? No. Hang on, Bill. Hang on. Let me see if I can do this.
It's 8 hours later in Europe than here?
He was in Canada.
Yeah, oh, he's in Canada now?
I think so. I don't know.
I think he got his point across. I don't either.
I hear you now.
Got it? All right. So, Bill, we heard your last statements there. Again, I do not support moving forward with planning for just a food hall and visitor center at the Armory. That's just not what I've gotten from, the input that we've reached out for. I appreciate what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from, but I think that the track that we're on is going to both improve the powerhouse so that it's possible in the future that it can be used for community uses, and it's going to get the Armory online as soon as possible. So other than that, I don't know where more work needs to be done around this. But primarily, I just can't agree with right now saying a food hall only at the Armory. That's just not what we've heard repeatedly from our community.
Tori, if I may, Bill, I've heard your presentation. I think there's validity to it. I've gone through many of these meetings on programming, and I don't want to revisit it. And I don't agree that the Army should be only for food court and maybe a kiosk here and there. So I hear you, I don't agree with you, and I don't support reopening that programming process.
All right. There's just not support for a work session to move on that track right now. Even the mountain rescue building, I mean, let me have some conversation with Sarah over this week and see where these puzzle pieces fit.
And if you'd like an update, the Rescue Mountain Building was at HPC last week and Kate was there.
Kate, what would you like to share with us?
Yes, the Mountain Rescue Project came before the Historic Preservation Commission last Wednesday. Jen Phelan was the staff member who presented that as the applicant to the Historic Preservation Commission. They did approve the project, which is a proposed affordable housing project that includes, I believe, one single-bedroom unit that's going to be deemed a studio under APSHA requirements, and then a two-bedroom unit on the top floor of that property. It was approved with conditions, and so, and I don't believe that will come, it may come back before you for call-up, but I wouldn't know, I would have to look at the approval exactly. But it may be coming back before you for call-up, but it was approved.
Yeah, I just want to say Sarah and I had a meeting with two local citizens on Friday, and I thought it went well. And I'm aware, because of this meeting, of the work that is being done to move the Armory project forward, and I'm satisfied with what's happening so far. The next steps are going to require council input, and when staff brings that information to us, I'm eager to look at it. Thanks.
Thanks, John. All right. Bill, do you have any other items? At this time, your request for a work session on those three buildings is not supported.
Okay, well, thanks for running it by everyone. I think we should have an update and talk about the financial piece of the mountain rescue cabin at the very least, as an individual item, but I'll continue to make calls to talk about all these things holistically because I do think they're very much interrelated.
Thanks, Bill. All right, with that, if there's no other items for discussion, we will call it a work session this evening. We are meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the Butcher Building.
I thought it was 9:30.
30 for coffee. 10 the meeting starts.
Yeah.
You'll want to be there earlier to choose your seat.
Yeah.
All right, and Bill, you're not going to participate in tomorrow's meeting, is that correct?
That's correct.
right.
Unfortunately, I'm traveling tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, man. Have a good day tomorrow then. Guys,
Thank you
see
so
you
much.
tomorrow morning. All right. Thank you. Thank you, GrassRoots.